Hello, friends. Welcome back to Tim Kirby Russia. You know our guest. He doesn't like when I mention his name that much, but he is a former U.S. Army officer, and he really broke down the war in Ukraine for us last month. We got a lot of positive feedback, so he's back again. That's how things kind of go around here. So anyways, let's just jump into it. So our big philosophical question for today, and I'll step back and let you break it down, is how is this new war in Palestine, Israel, different from the war in Ukraine, tactically, functionally, and so on?
Well, begin with there's upside two different. There's almost nothing in common, including the starting experience of the IDF. This war is a continuation of a conflict that arose from the 1947 UN mandate, which stated quite straightforward: there needs to be two states. There's the two-state solution, a Palestinian state and a Jewish-Israeli state. As we know, the Palestinian state never came to be.
Yeah.
Really, the only way to get out of this conflict, there's only one of three ways to get out of this conflict. Either A, implementing the two-state solution, B, a one-state solution, or C, a no-state solution.
The third option's new to me. That's interesting. What do you mean no state solution?
Well, that would be the Israel ceases to exist state solution.
Mm-hmm.
So if they continue playing the way they're playing, there may be a very good chance they will cease to exist, because they are really not realizing how the position that they find themselves in right now, or the position of the world and the world around them at this point. The one-state solution is where they give the Palestinians equal citizenship in Israel, which they won't do, because then the Jewish nationality may become a minority or something very close to being a minority. So they're not going to do that.
No.
Even without
allowing. They've had decades to do that. They've had a lot of time to do it, and they chose not to.
Right. Or just take the two-state. Even the two-state solution is basically impossible on the West Bank, because more than a third of the West Bank has now been occupied by the Israelis, and the West Bank is no longer a entity in its own. It's little island entities within the West Bank.
Mm-hmm.
So they, you know, and this is a conflict that's been going on and on and on. Hamas, which I view Hamas as a terrorist organization, they are an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. And when they were starting to grow, the Israelis, and in this case particularly Netanyahu, were feeding them. They're feeding them for one simple reason. Fatah is a nationalist organization. You have Sunni Muslims, you have Orthodox Christians, you have Catholic Christians, you have atheists, all these different people, but they're Palestinian nationalists. As opposed to Hamas, which is a Sunni Islamic, an extremist Sunni Islamic organization. Which is, by the way, why Egypt isn't running and didn't want to help, and they may wind up being dragged into this, because the Arab on the street is watching, or the Arab street is watching what the Israelis are doing, and it's boiling over in anger. And so, same thing with Jordan and all these other governments. None of them want to help Hamas. The last damn thing they want is an Islamic Jihadist state, their state lit on their borders or near their borders.
Because they'll try to cause a revolution for Egypt and Jordan or something like that.
Right. We can we don't have to go very far back in history to remember when America put Islamic jihadists in power in Egypt. It was called the Muslim Brotherhood that Barack Obama was very happy to bring to power. And thank God the army came in there and threw them all out and cut them all down. They're still fighting with them to some degree. And they killed, then the Islamic jihadists killed quite a few people there in Egypt. And then when Hamas took power in Gaza, there was a hell of a bloodbath in 2006, because they massacred any of the Fatah party members that hadn't fled. They massacred their wives, their kids, and everybody else. So these are not good people. These are not nice people. The thing is the vast majority of those Palestinians in Gaza aren't Hamas. They don't support Hamas. They don't get much of a choice. So then the psychopathic crap dribble that comes out of Jerusalem and Washington, oh, they just need to get rid of them and there'll be peace. How do you get rid of a bunch of guys that are armed to the teeth? Well, you ain't got any.
Well, yeah.
And they know that. That's the point. Is that they give themselves a fig leaf of cover to then massacre the people. You know, when Netanyahu reads from Deuteronomy to wipe out when God sent the Israelites to wipe out the enemies of God to the last man, woman, child, calf, lamb, and so on, and he reads that, and then the excuses, oh, but that's just the Amalekites, it's just a code word for enemies of Israel.
Oh,
no, it's,
yeah. Well,
he's flat stating the genocidal path he's planning on taking.
Yeah, and especially in a fairly religious society, most people know what he was talking about. Like, you know, they got the reference. And then at the same time, one thing that I found a little bit personally that really irked me was when they appeared at the UN with the Israeli diplomats with like the yellow stars, as if they were being sent off to the camps or something on their clothing. Oh, yeah. I thought that was really bad taste, ridiculous, and maybe even a little desperate to get attention or get mercy, because I think a lot of the mercy that Israel's had over the years for what may or may not have happened to them during World War II is really run down. It's in the negative.
Well, first of all, let's not confuse things.
No.
There are Jews, and then there's Israel.
Well, yeah, Israel's different.
Same thing. That's not interchangeable.
Yeah.
There are Jews in New York and Washington that are protesting against us.
Yeah.
There's the Jewish synod in Iran that said we have nothing to do with Israel and we don't agree with them, and we don't support them. Mm-hmm. They're loyal to their Russian Jews like Vladimir Solovyov, who flat out said, "I'm Jewish, but I'm Russian."
Yeah.
So it's painting. We won't paint everybody with the same paintbrush. Mm-hmm. And there are Jews in Israel that are protesting against what Netanyahu is doing. The difference is that, yes, the majority of Jews in Israel right now are in a blood rage. Mm-hmm. Whether they'll ever come off of it, God only knows. And I've got relatives there from my father's side, and you cannot talk to these people. No. You cannot get through in their heads. The Israeli kids were killed, so that gives you a reason to kill Palestinian kids. That makes you out better than anybody.
It all depends on the media, because that's one thing where I could come in and talk about from the media, is I think a lot of Russian people are really shocked to the degree that over the years they were able to really brainwash the population of what was Ukraine into hating Russia, or at least seeing it as being some sort of force for backwardness, even people who were Russians. So the power of propaganda is very strong, and I can imagine that for the average Israeli Jew, they're probably really have been inundated with one single form of propaganda about this issue their entire lives without hearing the other side.
In a more likely to some degree, yes, that's also true. Differences, of course, number one, as Russians, it's not in our cultural DNA to kill children. Mm. It's not. We didn't do it to the Germans. If we were anything, let me put it a different way. The only reason that the West exists and hasn't been exterminated by us is because we aren't Europeans. We aren't the West. Well, yeah. We don't think like the West. Because of all the shit that pardon my French.
Oh, that's okay. We're an open format here. Go nuts.
Good. Because all the shit that the West has done to us over the last 1,000 years, well, pretty much so. Only the laziest people in Europe haven't bothered trying to invade us, at least as a coalition, once or twice. If we did anything, if we were at any level the way the Europeans are, and Western society is in general, we would have exterminated most of Europe a long time ago. And I will give you this example. When General Suvorov in 1783, I think was the year, took Milan as he was fighting the French when Napoleon first came to power. Mm-hmm. So this is before Napoleon's 1812 invasion, or 1786, somewhere around there. Yeah. When he took Milan, and his army and the Russian army marched into Milan. The Milanese were bringing their daughters out to kiss the hands of the Russian soldiers. You know why?
No.
Because the standard in the West was when you took a city, you gave your army 1 to 3 days to rape, pillage, and murder at free will. And the Russian army was under strict orders. Any theft was a hanging offense.
Yeah. Same thing with
the population. Nothing was stolen, and they marched through. First day that of the Battle of Berlin, the first neighborhoods that were taken, by the end of the first day of that battle, soup kitchens were turned around, and the population was being fed.
Yeah.
And when Hitler flooded the metro to kill off, to stop movement of troops, and in turn was killing off hundreds of thousands of people who were hiding in those tunnels.
Yeah.
Russian soldiers and Soviet soldiers threw themselves into those metro stations to pull people out. More than a few died in the process, drowned in the process of saving Germans. The very Germans, they're feeding a machine that was out to exterminate us. And that's because even under the Soviet Union, we were Orthodox culturally. And an Orthodox Christian killing, even in battle, is a sin. It's always a sin. It may be a necessary sin, but it's still a sin. When an Orthodox soldier comes back, he cannot take communion until he has cleansed himself through fasting, through I can't think of the English word all of a sudden.
Prayer? Oh my God. Oh yeah, that one. Well, yeah, that's beyond my translation abilities. Well, I think that was something that was very shown in a recent video where one of the problem is I don't quite understand what his uniform was. The description said he was just some Russian soldier, but his uniform was sort of unstandard. Maybe he was a priest, I don't know, but he essentially apologized to the dead bodies of the other side. Like, there are a lot of guys with Ukrainian uniforms lying dead, and he apologized to them. And I thought that was a very Russian way of looking at things. Do you agree, or am I a foreigner who knows nothing?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Confession. Исповедание is confession.
Oh, yeah.
And we don't do confessionals for your audience that doesn't know anything about Orthodoxy. You do confession in front of the priest and the icon of Christ in the Bible. So there's no nice little screen that you can hide your face behind.
No.
So it's out in the open. No, as far as uniforms, there's a lot of the volunteer battalions. So they have different uniforms, depending who was donating, who was bringing. Nice. When they were originally formed, a lot of those guys just bought their own uniforms.
Okay.
So there's variants. Plus, when the DNR, LNR guys, they'll be eventually getting standardized uniforms. But a lot of them came in with whatever uniforms they had, and that was a huge range. So, but yeah, that's absolutely a normal Russian thing to do. I'm not in the least surprised by any of that. So that's us. So watching, and I was talking to my aunt, and she's like, "Oh, but." The Jews were hit. Yes, okay, they were hit, and that is a tragedy. And you had the sympathy of the world. Well, why is nobody when remembering Palestine? Well, even you're not worried about how your relatives are there and blah 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 from my father's side. The problem with you people is black and white. You can have sympathy for one side, and for the other side, and they don't have. There's a total lack of sympathy. And I'm sorry, I can't look at children being killed and be unsympathetic and be cold-hearted and cold-blooded.
Well, I don't know. Maybe to play devil's advocate here, maybe on some level we just don't understand because, like the powers that be in Israel, it just sounds easy from sitting from Russia to say, well, they could have had their sort of Israeli Zionist dream. And they have the flag, and they have the Star of David from the Maccabees that's on the flag, and they sort of have their country after World War II. And they could have maybe just, said, technically we restored Israel like our mission, but, maybe there's a lot of non-Jews here. We'll just sort of ignore that, and everyone will live forward, and we can live happily ever after. I mean, they could have done that, but maybe that's just naive, because that's a very Russian methodology. I don't know. Maybe it just seems easy from here.
Well, interesting, by the way, they restored Israel. They should have been restoring Judea. Israel, if we remember what's written in the Bible, when the Jews came into the Promised Land, they divided into two kingdoms: Israel to the north, Judea to the south. Israel became pagan, and God punished them how? He sent Nebuchadnezzar, the emperor of the Assyrians, who conquered them and dispersed them all over.
Well, yeah,
so Judea was
because the 10 tribes are in the north and the 2 good ones are in the south, right? Yeah.
Right. Even the 2 good ones,
well,
they stayed. They continued worshiping God, but they had this little bad tendency of killing off his prophets. Most of the prophets didn't exactly finish off very well. So there's that little tad bit from the Old Testament. So, having said that, there's also, especially for European viewers, there's also the Christian Zionist angle, why the U.S. blindly supports. An interesting fact, Christian Zionism predates Jewish Zionism. In fact, Christian Zionism created Jewish Zionism.
Oh, really?
A lot of people don't know. Well, you're familiar with Rapture.
Oh, yeah. Well, everyone in America is at least passingly familiar with it.
So for those who aren't familiar who are watching this, and for those who, or most Europeans have no idea, I've been explaining this on various Russian talk shows because they really can't understand why Americans are reacting the way they're reacting. I'm like, well, it's because a large part of America wants Armageddon.
Yeah.
They pray for Armageddon. They worship for Armageddon. It's a death cult, basically. These evangelicals that go for Rapture. So Rapture started in 1833 when John Darby, a preacher, an evangelical preacher, came up with this little unknown new theory of or dogma of Christianity. Basically, he took from Acts. He took one passage where God called up his saints to heaven to him, and he based this whole new theory that Christ was going to come back twice. The first time Christ was going to come back was in the sky, where he would call all his saints to him. And basically what it meant, and what he took as meaning is, these people wouldn't die. They would just teleport right up to heaven.
Yeah.
And of course, who are they going to be? They're going to be the evangelicals. And then for 7 years, everyone else was going to be, cats and dogs laying together, men, women eating each other, the whole end of the world thing. Yeah. The marshmallow man walking around destroying cities. the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, yeah. Basically, the whole end of the world, and then Christ comes back and judges everybody else, all the condemned, damned sinners, and while the evangelicals sit up there and go, ha, 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 ha. Yeah. Well, if you think all that is insane, it gets the rabbit hole gets deeper. First of all, by the way, what a lot of people don't know is amongst the evangelicals in the U.S., there's even associations where they go and talk to their damned neighbors, because they're not evangelicals, so that when they teleport up, the neighbors will come open the doors to let their cats and dogs out of the house.
Oh, interesting. That's another thing too about our let's just say, because now you're in Russia probably for the long haul here, like I am. One thing in the West, this obsession with these stupid animals, man, it's gone too far. But sorry, that's a whole rant for another day. But,
I've got a couple cats. I don't want them to die either.
On a more important, more maybe philosophical note, we should also then bring up that, in Russia, there really isn't an apocalyptic mindset. Like, people aren't worried about it. Especially even the Patriarch came out a few years ago, because you sent me a video of this extremely obese Protestant preacher saying that he knows for sure that this is going to be Armageddon. And I shared that, and I put the comments that the Patriarch of Moscow and all of Rus, he said that we don't know the day or the hour when the apocalypse is going to come, or when the end of the world is, and there's no urgency to create this. We have to be good in order to sort of keep this from eventually God taking us out. So essentially we can keep going indefinitely. And boy, that's a much better society to live in.
Well, if you actually read the Bible, when Christ was asked when basically what would be the second coming, even though it wasn't called the second coming at that point. The judgment was going to be. He said only the Father knows the day and the hour and the second.
Yeah.
So the Son doesn't. The Son of Man does not know. Christ does not know. And that's the second face of God.
Yeah.
Only the Father. So translation, don't come up with any silly formulas. Don't try. Well, and the thing is the evangelicals are trying to push God's hand to Armageddon. They need Armageddon, so they all get teleported away. Well, you can't have Armageddon if you don't have the third temple. You can't have the third temple until you have an ethnically pure Israel.
Oh.
Yeah, then you start down that rabbit hole. And this is where it begins to get interesting, because Christian Zionism, and everybody's heard Christian Zionism, it actually came from England, from these same evangelicals. It came for several reasons. One, the evangelicals don't like Jews for the most part. Most I know, if you actually start talking to Baptists, remember, they've got no love for Jews. But they need them. They need them because they need Israel. They need the third temple. They need Armageddon.
Nice.
They're all focused on it. So in the UK, the Christian Zionists actually created the Jewish Zionists. And we're pushing the Jews to immigrate out of England. So they free themselves of Jews that they don't like. And all the Jews go to Palestine. And Palestine is, because they're still immigrants of the UK, Palestine becomes part of the British Empire, which it was anyways, later on. But this is much later. It became after World War I. This was before World War I. And this is their little cycle plot there. And then they get the whole thing going, and then eventually the Third Temple and Armageddon and all that. It's just wound up taking a bit longer than they were planning. But the new generation is just happily waiting for Armageddon. I had a classmate of mine who wrote me about a month ago when all this started up. So Robin writes me, like, I'm so happy we're going to get to see each other pretty soon. Like, Robin, you guys are planning on coming to Russia? No, we'll see each other in heaven. It's almost the end of the world.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, but you know, just to put it in terms, just in America, there are 70 million evangelicals. Yeah. They give a hell of a lot more money to Israel than all the Jewish organizations in the U.S.
Yeah.
And in the Anglo sphere, there's probably a good 120 million evangelicals. And people here, you know, they watch these evangelical churches where they're dancing and they've got their hands in the air, they're playing guitar, and they think they're not religious. I was explaining to a friend of mine, like, no, they're actually extremely religious. They're fanatically religious, and they really want this in a
cowardly way.
Yes, but they're still fanatically religious. They're like, really, like, yes, and they really want Armageddon. So this is their push, and they're going to use the Israelis as a coup. Whether or not any Israelis live after this, it doesn't matter. They're not evangelical; they're damned anyways. Just like Orthodox Catholics and everybody else. It's a very intolerant, very cowardly in a way. Yes, fanaticism. So that's what I see as a major angle that's pushing the Israelis forward. So the problem with the Israelis and Netanyahu's, they haven't quite realized what kind of Middle East they're living in these days. You know, they had the sympathy of everybody. And in 2 weeks' time, they turned it into hatred. Iran may not have nuclear weapons, but it's got gas. It's got extremely accurate ballistic missiles. Yeah. It can. There are enough anti-ship missiles in Hezbollah's hands alone to do a lot of damage to two U.S. fleets that are off the coast of Cyprus.
Yeah, I actually wanted to even ask you about the future of the United States involvement, because I've read a few articles from the alternative media that say if the U.S. ever actually tried to, park that fleet near Iran and actually attack them, the Iranians have the ability to really do a lot of damage to the U.S. Navy. So you're saying, is that true, or is that fantasy from the alternative media?
Oh, no, it's true. Well, no, first of all, no American fleet, no fleet, period, will ever go into the Persian Gulf. It's a suicide. I mean, the Black Sea is a safe space compared to the Persian Gulf. Just getting through the Straits of Hamas, if you want to understand what the Straits are, if you're not familiar with them, there's no ship that can go through the straits by itself. All they can, because the water's just too shallow. So there are canals that have been dug through the straits, and the shipping goes up and down these canals. They can't veer left, they can't veer right, because they'll hit the ground and they'll be stuck. The water's that shallow in those areas. So once you get into those canals, closing those canals is actually very, very easy. Floating mines, sink a ship. That's very much so it. I mean, these big oil tankers have very deep keels. Yeah. Right. So once you take out these, there's like about a dozen canals. It's relatively easy. And the mountain range that the Iranians have facing the canal is just pockmarked with tunnels, pockmarked with natural caves, man-made caves, and there are missile systems up and down those mountains. Good luck trying to get rid of all of them. They really don't need to do that much to close the canal. That's the whole point in this case. And now with the Saudis anti-U.S., the Saudis, because the whole thing was, well, then it'll hit the Saudis' economy. The Saudis will be fighting also against Iran. There's a good chance they won't. And now the Turks are turning around with a million-man army. I heard a speech, and the Israelis may have a Turkish issue down to the north. So they're in a very bad spot. And Iran, after Trump had Salami, I think it was General Soleimani, assassinated. Soleimani, yeah, thank you. I'm horrible with names.
That's okay.
When he had Soleimani assassinated. Soleimani was on a peace mission because there were secret talks between Iran and Saudi Arabia to end all hostilities. And in the end, the Chinese were able to finish those peace talks. Soleimani was there in Iraq as a presidential guest for these talks, and Trump had him assassinated, which was in breach of all diplomatic norms to begin with.
Yeah, that was one thing Trump did that I definitely do not support. That was the end of any hope for relations with Iran. That was their guy. They'll never forget that shit. Maybe not for 2 or 3 generations.
The Iranians, if you recall, the Iranians said, we're going to hit your base. They didn't just say we're going to hit your base. They said which buildings on that base that we're going to hit. And everybody laughed at it. Patriots will take them out. Not only the Patriots did not take them out, they hit the buildings. They didn't just hit the base. They hit specifically the buildings. And the U.S. backed the hell off. Because the U.S. had to go change its shorts at that point. Because, oh shit, now you're dealing with something absolutely different. But it's still not sinking. It's the same thing as, one of the things that saved us from World War III earlier on, when Russia intervened in Syria and started sending IGIL, Organization Forbidden Russia, IGIL screaming to hell, was the Caliber missiles. That scared the shit out of NATO. Because you have these missiles that can be parked on almost any ship that's 50, 60 meters long in any place, and they took out their cruise missiles that flew up to 1,200 meters, and they can't carry a nuclear warhead. They came in and they did pinpoint strikes.
I see.
And at that point,
quickly.
Oh, very much so. But it did. Because Russia has proven it has this weapon system. But when Putin warned, we've got hypersonic missiles, we've got this, we've got that, nobody believed it. Oh, yeah, okay, those are just CGI. Well, when a Patriot system blew up or took out a hypersonic missile, of course it took it out by being its target. Oops. Yeah, when those hypersonics start screaming in, and there's absolutely nothing the West has that can stop them. Yeah, because they're also maneuvering. They're not even doing. You can take out, if you have enough time and distance, you can take out a hypersonic object if you have a fast enough computer to calculate the ballistics and shoot them, and you have enough time to shoot an interceptor that'll explode in its path. There is a chance you can take out a hypersonic missile if it's going in a ballistic straight line path. Problem is the congeal maneuvers. So if you're one, it maneuvers. Two, it goes Mach 8, which is 10,000 kilometers per second. I mean, I'm sorry, per hour. So you're talking about 3 kilometers per second.
Yeah.
So if you're a MiG and you've launched a Kinjal from 40 kilometers away, the Patriot system has about 10 seconds because the missile has to accelerate at first, but it has about 10 seconds to react. It's not going to. As we saw when the Patriot was taken out south of Kiev, it fired off 32 missiles. They were just panic firing at that point. 3 of those missiles flew in God only knows which directions because they didn't go up. They went side, hit a building here, hit a building there. So about 10% of the missiles just went scurvy all over the place. And by the way, 32 missiles at $5 million a pop.
Oh boy.
U.S. taxpayers.
Well, then one thing is, if what you're saying is true, why hasn't the NATO maybe quietly tried to pull back from conflicts like Ukraine or, it seems like with the problem in Israel, it seems like there's going to be more pulling of especially U.S. forces to the Middle East. So if they feel they're being outclassed in a lot of ways and previous non-threats like Iran have become threats, why aren't they sort of moving away or restructuring or readjusting, or are they actually doing that?
Well, the Iranians, I watched a little news clip from the Iranians. They said for the last 3 days, the U.S. has been contacting them asking for a ceasefire. Problem is, nobody believes anything that comes out of Washington, and properly so.
Yeah.
Everything that comes out of Washington is a lie, or a maneuver to buy some time and then stab someone in the back. Biden and his crew and most of the U.S. Congress, Republican and Democrat, and there's almost no difference between those two, with some exceptions, of course. But with the majority of them, there's no big difference. Nobody believes them. They've lied so much, betrayed so much, and nobody believes them.
Well, yeah.
And now you've got a really big problem.
They've lied to the Russians, to the Chinese, to the Iranians, basically everyone in the Middle East. And even like the thing, a real one I think took balls was when, Washington tried to essentially have Maduro overthrown and thus killed. And recently they were like, dude, could you turn on the gasoline pumps again? We need the gas. Like, that's some balls, man. That's out of control.
We'll even pay you some of our debt.
Yeah. They didn't even They didn't even say we'll eliminate sanctions. They said something like we'll reduce sanctions.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Well, come on. You've got major military minds like Light and Loafers Lindsay, who I'd been mistaken about him originally. I thought he never served, but he actually did serve. He wore the uniform. Oh. He was a JAG lawyer. So he kind of wore the uniform, just like Kirby was who made 1 star and never commanded anything, was always on staff or doing some. He was even an editor of the Navy newspaper, our magazine. All these wonderful combat ready politicians in the Biden White House and the U.S. Congress.
Because McCain fought, and he became one of the most bloodthirsty people of all. With a lot of the Russian politicians who served in World War II, it made them very anti-war. But with McCain, I guess after getting tortured, he just wanted revenge against everyone who was un-American or something. I don't know. He had the opposite effect.
Well, there's that whole torture thing, too, which is under a very, very big question.
Oh.
And I'll tell you why.
Mm-hmm.
Because anytime U.S. officers were interrogated, there was a KGB agent there with them.
Mm-hmm.
They'll review the interrogations. Yeah. Since the Soviet Union was actively supporting the Vietnamese, and allied the Vietnamese. So there was a KGB agent who wrote a book about McCain. Mm-hmm. First of all, the Vietnamese knew who McCain's father was. And in Asian mentality, since he was the son of the commanding general for the theater, he was going to get better treatment than anyone else, like it or not. McCain gained weight in solitary and in confinement. He came back, everyone else came back skeletons. He came back nice and puffy, which is why he couldn't come back in waves. And what he said was McCain's torture was an apartment in Pyongyang with a couple prostitutes.
Gotcha. Well, maybe perhaps he built a legend for himself after the war, That's
Right. Came back within 2 years, divorced his wife, married daughter of a billionaire, and started his political career.
mhm.
Um, McCain, scum and sleaze, as scummy as sleazy as he gets. But an interesting thing too is McCain blocked all efforts to find lost POWs and to do a lot of the other research. And he blocked the CIA from, or I guess NSA, I'm sorry, NSA, from releasing any of the out briefings for any of the POWs that came back.
Oh, because
Because everybody got
he didn't want his story to be revealed, but be corroborated. Gotcha.
right. It was all secret, stamped secret, and then when it was a move in Congress to release it, it's been 20 something years. What the hell, after, so this was more, it was about 30 years later. Oh, he blocked every single effort.
Huh. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. McCain. The gift that kept on giving.
Now,
So,
now while I still have you here as a military expert, I just kind of want to then ask your opinion about this Israeli Defense Force. Again, we have these two versions of reality. The alternative media shows it as if they just take everyone into the army. It's not a very serious thing. Everyone's filming TikToks rather than learning how to fight, and the IDF can't do anything. The mainstream media shows them as being essentially an equivalent force in terms of professionalism to, say, America's military in like the 1980s at sort of a high point. What is this IDF actually like? Is it a real fighting force, or is it this TikTok, social club?
well, I was going to thank God you said the U.S. Army in the 80s. The 80s and 90s, the U.S. Army was actually pretty efficient.
Well, that's why I've been told that's our real high point when things were at max professionalism. So,
modern U.S. Army is a joke. It's a very, very sad joke because sooner or later the joke is going to be shown to what it is, and there's going to be a lot of corpses in the U.S. In the U.S. military because it's a non-disciplinary, overweight joke.
mm-hmm.
By the way, U.S. Army this year had 20% 20% obesity rate.
Yeah, that's what they're saying. And man, I even watched this one, not to go too deep into a side, but basically it was a movie about even the, sort of the spoils of the Iraq War, like all the stuff they found there and like Saddam Hussein's palaces. So this wasn't even that, that's not like a recent thing. It was a while ago. And it was scary. How many people spoke with really obvious accents, and how many people were obviously not fit for duty just by looking at them. I mean, I'm like a kind of schlubby guy in my 40s, and I looked way more healthy than they were. So I was stunned by that, because that was a while ago. That's, the Saddam Hussein era. That's, your early 2000s. So, yeah.
I barely, okay. The first time I saw an overweight person was a major in Bosnia who had been, she was a reservist, and she'd been activated. You're sitting there looking at her like, damn, they make 4 uniforms that big?
Oh.
Let me explain to you what the U.S. military standard was, at least for the Army, when I served. Now, by the way, 20% is this year. Last year was 16%, so it jumped 4%. And it's jumped 4% because they're letting anyone in because there's not enough people.
Yeah.
The standards are below rock bottom. We didn't have obesity. You had a physical fitness test every 6 months. You were weighed by, it was a measurement called body fat index. It was a taped by your height and your weight. I had to be taped every damn time. Because I came out as a beast, by the way, as a beast. Because my muscle mass is very heavy and my bones are very heavy.
Yeah.
32 weight, I had a 32-inch waist. I've got about 33 and a half right now, so I've got a little bit more on there, but not for 50. I was 30. I had a 32-inch waist, so they measured me. They measure your arms, your chest, your waist, your upper legs, and then when they measured it, okay, you're within standards. And obviously, I was within standards. Usually they look at me like, "Damn, we have to measure you." But yeah, because I'm heavy. I'm very heavy, but that's just physically. But by the standards, by my height, to my weight, I was at risk of obesity as far as the standard goes. Now, anybody that didn't pass the tape measure test,
Mm-hmm.
You got an exercise and diet plan. And you had to start showing results within the month. And if you weren't showing results of where you were going back into normal, you're getting disciplinary action with eventual expulsion out of the military as unfit for duty.
No. Well,
I mean, unless you had medical
I was sort of part of like a Russian army reality show, so maybe I was in the army for 7 days, but they had total control over everything you ate. So essentially, it was impossible to get fat because you weren't given enough food. How can these people become obese in the military when they're everything's controlled?
You don't mix basic training or advanced individual training with everyday duty. Everyday duty, get done with the duty at 5:30. You're released at 6, 5 between 5 and 6. You get released. Last formation. There you go. If you want to go Burger King up for the rest of the day, you can go Burger King up for the rest of the day.
I see.
So you're off. You're off until the next morning. Go get drunk as long as you're able to. You're fit for duty and you're not smelling of alcohol the next morning, and so on. Then you got the weekends, you got holidays, you got vacation. So if somebody wanted to chow out all the time, they could chow out all the time on their free time. So there's that possibility. Right, when you're in basic, when you're in your individual training, advanced individual training, that you are controlled. Of course you're controlled. Officers and sergeants obviously are, but then officer basic is something entirely different. But you're expected to keep standards and be the example. Soldiers, we used to have a fat camp. Yeah. So if a soldier was borderline fat when he was signing up, they would send him to fat camp for between a month to 3 months, where he'd just get exercised until he dropped weight and got down to the minimal needed standards to go to basic training. Again, all of this is done in the U.S. Army has gone out the window because attrition. They can't get people in, and a lot of people are leaving. So the U.S. Army is a joke compared to us. But let's go back to IDF. Yeah. That was the question. Now, back in the 80s and 90s, the IDF was a serious machine, maybe even the early 2000s. There are units in the IDF that are very serious units. So you can't say everybody is a joke. But the majority of the IDF is reservists. They're not professional soldiers. They came in, they did their about a year, I think, or maybe 2 years they have to do, and they left. And they went on with their own careers. They're not professional soldiers. When Russia mobilized 350,000 soldiers, mobilized, a lot of the West kept portraying it as a draft. It wasn't a draft. It was a mobilization of reservists. Reservists that A, had served in combat arms, and B, had combat experience.
Yeah.
And most of these guys, except for some guys that were pushed right into units to fill holes, the vast majority of these guys were trained up for another 3 months. Intensive training to get their skill levels back up to where they need to be. I mean, I spent 11 years in. Can I do combat if you just threw me an AK? Sure, yes, I can. Will I be at my peak? No, I won't, because there are drills that I need to repeat to get them back into total instinctual level. That they are not at the total instinctual level. Soldiers react by instinct. Then they start thinking. Because if you start thinking before you react, you're going to die. I mean, it's just that simple. When you're in a close ambush is hand grenade range. When you're in a close ambush, the only way to survive is by doing your close ambush drill. Close ambush drill is when you drop down, return fire, throw grenades, and assault through.
By assault through, you mean run at them?
Run at them and shoot them. Yes, run through them and shoot them. Yeah. The only chance of surviving, because if it's an ambush, it's in a prepared location. Any place you think you're going to hide, it's going to be either covered by mortar fire, sniper fire, machine gun fire, or a mine or two waiting for you to jump in there. I mean, this is a prepared kill sack. Yeah. Anything you're going to try to break contact, you're going to get killed. That's the whole point of a prepared ambush. The only thing you can do in a prepared ambush is assault. More likely you're still going to wind up dead, but you might assault through, because the enemy's not in a good position either. That's why it's an ambush. Yeah. They're not in good dug-in positions. They're probably behind trees or areas like that, because if you start digging in, then it's going to be obvious there's enemy troops there.
Gotcha.
It won't be an ambush anymore. So yeah, civilians, their first instincts either cower down and probably shit themselves, or try to run away. Either option is the best way to meet God very, very quickly. So your only chance is to solve through, and that's one of those drills that are just constantly beaten into your head. You do it, you do it, you do it, you do it. You stop thinking, you just do it, and then when you're in the middle of it, you start thinking. Your brain starts kicking in, but then you've either died already, or you're probably going to live. Anything else that's not instinctual actions. Same with artillery. Same with sniper fire. Same with all of this. If you've got to stop and go, what do I do now? You're going to die. And there's a problem with these reservists. They got pulled in, and in very short order, a lot of these guys that haven't done this stuff in years, maybe decades, are now expected to fight. The other thing I've noticed, I've watched a couple of videos. It's just amazing tomfoolery from the IDF as they're beating their chests. They've, considering Israel sent 2,500 instructors into Ukraine to help the Ukrainians. So a lot of these guys are either dead or they came back to Israel. They really learned nothing. Okay, you can tell that by the way they're fighting. For example, go north to south. Against Hezbollah, Israel has its self-propelled howitzers lined up. And you look at them, first of all, the howitzers are 50 meters from each other.
That's,
and their ammo stashes
to me.
Yeah, and their ammo stashes for reloading are right behind them.
Oh.
I mean, this is totally ignoring the threat of drones, suicide drones. I mean, right now, an average Russian and Ukrainian too, for that matter. Well, Ukraine doesn't have that many left, but a battery of Russian self-propelled artillery is about 100 to 200 meters apart from each other. And there's just enough artillery rounds in there to keep firing. The rest are further down. You bring them up as they need it, because you got to keep them in small areas. So if one little pile gets hit, it doesn't take out a lot. Because welcome to drone warfare. These guys are totally ignorant of drone warfare. They're out in an open field, lined up. I mean, if Hezbollah goes for the whole Monty, they're gonna wipe them out.
Yeah,
it's not gonna take much. Then there was a nice video of Israeli troops, IDF troops, at the edge of some ruins in a field, vehicles parked, and they're all in a big circle eating and relaxing. And the video was being taken by a drone from Hamas as it flew over them and dropped a mortar round on top of them. So a couple dead guys, a bunch of wounded guys, and everyone else was running for the hills.
Yeah. Well, one thing is, how exactly is the modern soldier supposed to deal with the drone nightmare? Like, what can even be done? Because because I've seen so much drone footage of the Russian drone operators making their attacks, some of the Ukrainian operators making their attacks, and there's this thing called, fatigue. Eventually someone's got to sleep. You can't stay constantly on perfect guard against them. What can you even do against drones?
Well, first of all, there's always electronic warfare. There are electronic warfare rifles. I was in contact with one guy. He's making those rifles. I'm not going to say where. I mean, they're going to the front.
Details out, yeah.
And they're running about and these are actual rifles, and they have the antenna set in the middle, so you can. It's got about 2 hours worth of shooting, of actual shooting. But of course, you're not constantly pulling the trigger. And they can take out a drone at about a 1.5 kilometer distance. Depending on what kind of drone you have, the simpler drones, you just put it right down. You guide it right down into the ground. Some of the drones will go back to their master, depending on the programming. Other drones, you can just crash them, because they lose total connection and they can't balance themselves. And if you jerk them down,
from the perspective of someone who's used a drone to film stuff, if they get hit by a magnetic field, they tend to kind of just commit suicide. Like, they just go and they go somewhere and they hit it and the blades explode and they're done. So, yeah.
So that's one. Also, when it's bad weather, which you don't get many drones. Fog, rain, drones aren't flying during rain for obvious reasons. Especially if it's icy rain, you're not going to get any drones because you know what's going to happen with those drones. They're going to ice up and they're going to crash. They're going to get too heavy and they're going to crash.
So in the Russian military, this is probably not a secret, but do they actually have like some sort of anti-drone specialists in each squad? You know, like how in a squad they have a machine gunner or so. I don't know about the Russian structure. From the standpoint of a guy who played a lot of war games on tables, there's usually normal guys and there's some specialists. So is there an anti-drone specialist is like the norm now?
It may not be the norm now, but it's going to be the norm now. If it's not the norm now, it's simply because there's not enough rifles yet. There's a lot of small industry that's making these rifles, and they're running around the $2,000 mark. They're getting better constantly. Their range is increasing. Better backup packs on them for longer utilization before recharge, and so on and so on. So the technology leaps and bounds over what it was 2 years ago. War is good for that. Russians are really good at that. We're very, very good at taking whatever the hell we have in our hands and making it a hell of a lot better by the end of the first combat experience. Just our nature. So don't ever underestimate us because we'll come at you today with a knife and tomorrow with a plasma cutter.
Well, yeah, Russia's very adaptable, and again, people in Russia have become a lot more religious over time, but at the same time, people like technology. My one friend, he's always baffled. He's like, Americans always think if Russians are now religious, they have to hate technology. And it's like, no, people are very pro-technology here. It's a very technological society, even with crosses, farms and all that. But so anyways, you mentioned that they didn't learn their lesson in Ukraine. So besides like the artillery sort of failures in the north, what other aspects of the IDF do you find that are sort of strange or didn't really learn anything from the Ukrainian conflict?
Well, like I said, with the infantry in Gaza that got hit, sitting around in a circle eating their lunch. The way you do things is you go in very small groups. You don't ever bunch up. You go in small groups. That's how you survive. I mean, that's how you survive. You go cover. You run like mice whenever you need to. You stay away from open areas because they're drones. And again, it depends on how many drones you have, how many drones the enemy has, if you have any rep. I work in the electronic warfare, anti-drone electronic warfare. Look, the electromagnetic pulse guns. Some of them are mounted. You can also have rep mounted on tanks. We do now have systems that are mounted on tanks, and they're running off of the tank engine. So they're almost constantly shooting out an electromagnetic pulse in most directions to screw up any of the incoming drones. Another thing, another interesting video. Two Hamas fighters pop out of a tunnel. There are two Merkava tanks in front of them. One guy literally grabs a rocket-propelled grenade, not the tube, just the grenade.
Yeah, and he runs
with it. Yeah. Plants it, blows the one, runs back, jumps in the hole, grabs the tube with a mounted grenade, and pops it in the second one. Now remember, a Merkava is not simply a tank. It's a mix between a tank and an infantry fighting vehicle. They've got 6 infantrymen they can carry. There's a reason tanks don't go into combat by themselves. They go with infantry. Because of guys like that can pop up with an RPG or they can pop up with an Enlo or whatever else with a javelin and pop the tank, especially pop the tank in the side or the rear.
Yeah.
This guy, I mean, I got to give it to him. This is, he's got balls of friggin'.
How could anyone even approach a tank? Because again, my sort of Hollywood movie vision of modern warfare is there's so much surveillance. The weapons have such insane distances they could kill people at, and this guy essentially does a melee kill on a tank. He just comes up, plants, and runs away like it's a video game, and that's crazy. How did they not notice him?
Easy. The tankers don't see shit. The reason you drop a moving tank on attacking tanks isn't to kill the tank, because the chances of hitting a moving tank with artillery fire just coming down, unless it's being laser guided, just a barrage of fire, are almost zero. You got to get a good tight hit on top of the tank to take it out. But what happens is when artillery starts blasting everywhere, you get shrapnel flying. So when you get shrapnel flying, what happens to the tank commander? Either he gets chopped into little pieces, or he gets in and he closes the hatch. Just so you know, a driver has a periscope that's about that wide, about that wide. That's what he sees the world as.
Yeah.
A gunner sees the world as this. That's his periscope. That's his scope on his gun, right? A tank commander, he's got scopes in a semicircle on top of the tank, so he can turn it around and look at these different periscopes, but he's looking atop of the tank turret. Basically, 3/4 of the tank is blind. You have more than one tank. If more than one tank are working together, and tanks usually don't work by themselves, they work in a... if you see one tank, there'll be 2 tanks. There'll be a pair. If you see a pair, there's going to be a platoon. There'll be 4 tanks, or 3 tanks in Russia, and so on and so on. Tanks don't go by themselves normally. Tanks will what they call scratch each other's back. So if infantry is getting on top of a tank to blow it up, the wingman tank is going to open up on that infantry with machine gun fire, scratch the other tank, scratching each other's back as well. But tanks normally go with infantry, either on the tank or going parallel with the tank, just because somebody might pop up with an RPG and take it out. And the Israelis actually came up with very good methods back in the 67 war, I think. Or is it the 72 war, 74 war? Basically, the Egyptians crossed...
I'm not a great Middle Eastern historian, but 67 seems to sound more right, but I could be wrong.
I think it's 67. The Egyptians crossed over secretly and planted 2-man teams all over the desert, dug in with Sagar missiles. And when combat was initiated, the Israelis charged in with tanks. And it was a great charge, and they lost a brigade of tanks real quick. Because as they passed through, these Sagar teams would pop up out of the ground, pop a Sagar, 2-3-man teams pop a Sagar in its ass, in the tank's ass, and watch the tank burn. So the Israelis pulled back, and then they loaded up infantry, and they came back. And the infantry, the thing is, the Egyptians didn't adapt this time, because they tried to do the same thing again, and this time, as soon as they popped up, the infantry shot them down. So you'd think they would have at least historically remembered something, but they obviously haven't. So you watched one guy, this super athletic guy, or guy with balls of titanium, literally plant the rocket propelled grenade itself on the tank, and then run back as it blows up, and then take the second one out. I was like, you got to admire that. I mean, he may be your enemy, he may not be your enemy, but you got to admire that.
That is very
hardcore.
I'll say that. So anyways, before you have to go, we've been talking for an hour, so one kind of last question. As someone who knows a lot about war, how do you think the Israel-Palestine, or maybe Israel versus Hezbollah-Hamas conflict is going to go militarily? Where are we going here within the next year?
Well, I'd be more worried about where we're going within the next month. First of all, it's no longer just Hamas and Hezbollah. It's now Hamas, Hezbollah, and Yemen. And the list is starting to grow. And unless these atrocities stop, and I don't see the Israelis having the wherewithal to stop themselves.
Sadly,
they're in a bloodlust. And they're going to, usually, the U.S., one of the roles the U.S. government did was it saved Israel from itself. Eisenhower did a good job of that. When the Israelis crossed the Suez Canal, they said, no, get the hell back. We're not supporting you. And they got the hell back. And then they worked out a good deal with Egypt. It was a very good deal. It's lasted up to now. And one of the reasons Egypt even said, Nasser said that they were going to war. They didn't have a good chance of winning the war, but they needed that war for the Israelis to overstep their bounds, and then the U.S. would come in and stop all of this, and then there would be a peace.
Oh no, I think we may have lost you there. Oh, sorry, we lost you there for a second. We lost like the last 10 or 15 seconds. Sorry. Continue on, please.
Yeah, Nasser was, when the Egyptians crossed over and attacked the Israelis, they didn't expect to win. They actually wanted the Israelis, they knew they didn't have enough strength to stop the Israelis. They wanted the Israelis to overstep their bounds and cross the Sinai Peninsula. I mean, they're already in the Sinai Peninsula, I'm sorry, to cross the Suez Canal and into Egypt proper. Because they knew the U.S. would step in there and pull the Israelis back and force them to sign a good peace. And they did sign a good peace, a peace that's held for a very long time, that's on the edge of being ripped up now, because the Arab fleet's watching this massacre.
No.
So I don't know how else to call it. I mean, it is a massacre. Just so your audience understands, there's been about 10,000 people killed now by the Israelis out of Palestinians. There have been, in almost 2 years of war, there's been 8,500 civilians killed on the Ukrainian front.
Oh,
and that's what the UN recognizes as official numbers. Out of those, more than 5,000 have been Russians that were killed by Ukrainian daily bombings of Donetsk, Lugansk, and various other towns.
Yeah.
So you can't even compare that. Within, you have 10,000 dead civilians just on one side in less than a month. In 3 weeks.
That's yeah. I was gonna ask you about that, and I kind of forgot. Maybe just to get that dark thought out of my mind. But yeah, I saw that the comparison that within less than a month they're able to vastly exceed the civilian casualties. That's nuts. So do you mean to say that this might last a month, as in when the Arab world really unites against them, it'll force the United States to come in and do something, as in negotiate something or surrender the parts of like the West Bank that they absorbed into, you know what I mean, that they've sort of taken away, or what do you think is going to be the resolution of this?
Best case scenario. The best case scenario is the U.S. is going to force the Israelis to back down. There'll be some kind of negotiating, maybe a two-state solution finally. I mean, Hamas has to go one way or the other. Fatah is the government. Fatah are irrational people, as rational as the people in the Middle East get. We got to put that caveat in there. They're all a little crazy, or a lot crazy. So having said that, yeah, it is. Not enough water. Having said that, that's the best case scenario. Worst case scenario, let me put it this way. Nuclear powers don't lose wars.
Gotcha.
And if Israel is not exterminated, they will launch everything they have. And I have no doubt those people will nuke everything around them. It'll take out themselves too, because even if they survive an onslaught, there won't be any habitable land around there with nukes going off all over the place. It's a relatively small area of land.
Well, yeah, they'll all be breathing it in one way or another, just later.
Right.
So.
Right. And not much later. Not the way the trade winds blow. So that's the worst case scenario. Which way it goes, unfortunately, I'm leaning more and more toward the worst case scenario, or something a little less worse than my worst case scenario, because unfortunately there is no adult leadership in the U.S. government. Europe is just a bunch of whores that are bought and paid for and created by the U.S. and the U.K. And the U.K. is a lapdog of the U.S. and the U.S. is, they're old people in power, but they're not adults, and they never were adults. There are no people that have any concept of what they're really doing and thinking further than 10, 20 minutes past their next emotion or their next what's good for me moment.
Well,
so, yeah.
I'm going to have to say thank you very much for giving us an hour of your time. Fascinating as always. And I hope we can have you back on the program maybe next month or in a month or two. And hopefully at that point in time we can talk about the best case scenario coming true.
I very much so hope the best case scenario. But God gives us free will, and we do with it what we want. And most of the time we do something wrong with it.
Yeah, and that's why I'm fat. Anyways, thank you very much for being here. Tim Kirby Russia, signing out.